Greetings, everyone. This is Ehav Ever from the Chronicles of Ehav Ever, and today I'm going to be doing a video about good sources versus bad sources. So, the topic, as I mentioned before, is good sources versus bad sources. And this video has kind of been a long time in the making. I think I've covered it in certain areas, but not as a specific video. And I think I have kind of addressed elements of it, but not in the way I'm going to do in this video. So, when it comes to the issue of good sources versus bad sources. I always find it interesting that quite a bit of what I find in this area seems to have started up with the internet, interestingly enough. I know that throughout history, there have always been questions of whether something's a good source or a bad source. And I know that there are times where certain cultures didn't pass on information to the average person for them to know whether something was a good source or a bad source. But I find it interesting that in the day and time where you have the internet and the ability to search out information and to be able to try to find as much as possible the originals, the most old or whatever methodologies of certain things, that there's some people who seem kind of unaware of how to do that or unaware of how to actually process that kind of information. And in some cases, they're willing to follow people who themselves don't seem to have a good grasp sometimes on information. And in this video, I kind of want to talk about that a little bit. So in order to discuss this, I'm going to be discussing from a Torath Mosheh perspective in terms of what a good source is. Now, when dealing with Torath Mosheh, the definition of what a good source is something that is very simple. And it basically is basically consolidated within 3 steps. First of all, the question is whether it's ancient, whether it's authentic, and also whether it's authoritative. These are the 3 components that a person who follows Torath Mosheh would be looking for in terms of information. Concerning the issue of like how ancient is that information, that's being presented. Is it something that if I trace it back through the generations, through the years, I can find something that confirms that information, through its appropriate methodologies, meaning things that are scientific or scientific, things that are historical or historical, things that are philosophical or philosophical, and so on, that they meet those criterion based upon whatever the discipline is. Whether it's authentic, is this something that, someone pulls out, like let's say a scroll, and I look at the scroll and it's got like, modern English written on it, but someone's claiming it's 3,000 years old. Well, okay, I'm going to take that with a huge grain of salt and maybe not take it at all, because that's not authentic. For example, someone presents something to me that is written in an ancient language, but it's something that when I go and try to find out any information about it, you can't find anything to back up what is being made about it. And then the next step, of course, the last one being is it authoritative? Sure, I pull it out and it looks ancient, but if nobody has ever accepted it to be true, or if only like, people who are strange, weird, or, uneducated, can't read it for themselves, or are faulty in their logic, or couldn't survive with that information, are the ones presenting it, then it's not authoritative. If it's something where, I'm looking for other people who've kept Torath Mosheh through the generations, have expressed that that information over there is not authoritative, it's questionable, then I have to, disregard it just like they did, especially when it comes to something that is closer to the singularity, the point of when the correct information would have started up, which they would have known and be able to identify. So when getting into this issue, as I've mentioned in previous videos, the Sefer Torah and also the transcriptions of it into a book form, or into a Chumash form, are the basis of all Torath Mosheh information. If a person can't prove something from the Torah starting there first, then it's disregarded immediately, because this is the information that's been passed down from the time of the giving of the Torah at Har Sinai by Hashem to Moshe Rabbeinu and to Am Yisrael, and through the generations, and it's something that's common amongst all Torath Mosheh communities. So if someone is contradicting that information, then it's something that immediately it's known that can be disregarded. So from there, all the information that is considered authoritative can be found in information that is common and also understood and known amongst various Jewish communities throughout the generations. There are particular sets of information and particular books as well as oral traditions that have been passed on that can be easily identified as being authoritative. And it's authoritative because of the fact that that information is known far and wide within Torath Mosheh communities. So then identifying what a Torath Mosheh community is pretty easy. When I look through various, or when anybody looks through information that's considered Torath Mosheh, You have to look and say, okay, well, what things, who are the people who pass this down? The people who are Jewish, our families pass this from generation to generation. If I go and ask my father, my grandfather, so on and so on, going back through the generations, do I find this information? If it's a good source, I'll find it through, those particular family lines. But you also find it amongst other Torath Mosheh communities and other Jews. It's something that wouldn't be completely unknown. Now, there may be disputes about certain things, but again, there's information at its basic level that should be pretty common amongst those communities, and it should be something that can easily be determined, especially in our modern era, by simply going to, leaders of communities or older people in Jewish communities and saying, okay, this thing here, have you ever heard of it before? Did your father ever hear about it? Did your grandfather hear about it? People asking their families, Abba, father, have you heard of this? Grandfather, have you heard of this? Grandmother, have you heard of this? Mom, have you heard of this? So on and so on. So this is the kind of path a person would take to determine whether something is a good source or not. And further, when talking about the leaders of various communities, if I were to go to the most well-respected and most well-known leaders of Jewish communities, whether they be rabbis or people who are not rabbis but are just leaders, do I find them having the common information? Do I find them saying that yes, this source here that you've shown me is authentic or authoritative, or are they saying I've never heard of this? This is something, just get rid of it, don't even accept it, and here are the reasons why. Not just simply someone saying don't accept this, don't ever like read something like this, but them being able to explain why the information is problematic and why the source is no good. So then the next question could be, okay, well, what exactly is a bad source? We've covered what a good source is and how we identify it, and in my other videos we've covered that. But what exactly is a bad source? So I considered trying to show in some way in this video what a bad source is, but then that became problematic because you end up having to call people out, and it could easily be someone saying, well, that's just your opinion of what a bad source is. So the way I would simply put it is this. Everything that I presented earlier is something that's not just me making it up. That's something that you find amongst all ancient Jewish communities. So essentially, if it doesn't match what's been mentioned before, it doesn't prove itself to be ancient, authentic, and authoritative, then it's simply a situation of probably going from worse to bad. And a person is possibly, really looking at a bad source if it can't be proven through those means. This could be true of anyone who sits there, and including myself, who sits there and presents something that can't be shown and proven in any way to be the truth, especially if it's being presented as the truth. So if someone's saying that the ancient practice of the Jewish people was this or that, and then you look and say, okay, well, I don't see this being proven out through anybody. Sometimes the response that I've had people tell me is that, oh, well, everybody forgot it except for me. And it's like, well, wait a minute, how are you the only one? You obviously can't be the only one. I mean, that's just literally impossible. That the Creator would give the Torah to the entire Jewish nation that existed at that point, put protocols in place to make sure it was transmitted through all the Jewish nation, and then everybody magically forgot it and didn't get it right, and then all of a sudden somebody in the modern age just all of a sudden is like, I'm the one who's got it right, and no one else has got this right except for me. Come follow me. And I can count on probably like at least the hands of everybody in my neighborhood how many times I've had someone present me with something like that. Even recently on my video, someone put a comment on where they were saying, well, there's this methodology of understanding the Torah that was only found in Qumran, and they had it right, everybody else has got it wrong, and nobody's got it right but them. And now me and this one rabbi are following it. And then they start presenting this idea of using drugs to get to this point of understanding it, and you don't find that in Jewish communities anywhere. So if my thing is, okay, well, if that's what you believe is the situation, you and your rabbi can have your little thing over there somewhere. I'm not going to follow that because that doesn't match up with what the Torah has and doesn't match up with the Masorah, and it doesn't match up, and it's not ancient, authentic, or authoritative. And that can be pulled out of anywhere. I mean, there's people who can pull ideas out of almost any place and say, okay, well, this is authoritative. I mean, you find religions of ancient and modern and New Age sources that claim this, and this is the way that a person would know that potentially what they're looking at is a very, very bad source. And it's basically a situation where a person has to investigate all their sources daily. I mean, there's always times where I'm questioning whether or not something I provided is correct or not. And there's times I look at my old videos, for example, and say, okay, I should have said that differently. I should have thought that differently. Or I learned something, it's like, I didn't know that back then. Now I know this now. So these are the things that, part of life is a growing process where a person has to always try to verify what it is they hold by and why and where they got it from. And that includes things that that I'm certain about. There's things that I'm 100% certain about now that I still question. I still go back and try to determine where I got that from and recheck my sources and recheck my information and do experimentation and sometimes to check, to make sure that there's, people out there who can explain it better than what I've had explained to me in the past. So in conclusion, basically a good source is something that again is going to be ancient, authentic, and authoritative. It's going to be something that you can find amongst all ancient Jewish in Torath Mosheh communities. It's going to be something that you can find some commonality of the source of where it came from. And it's something that, for example, just, isn't in the hands of just one person as if everyone else like didn't get it right, only they got it right. Generally speaking, when someone, even if they come up with a new way of presenting a bit of information, they're usually going to, if they're going to be, according to this thing that I've mentioned, they're usually going to present it in a way where they're saying, okay, here are the sources for what I'm talking about, or at the least, you'd be able to look and say, okay, this isn't so foreign. I may not agree with every little thing here, but this isn't foreign to what what I've known. So someone who's talking about something that contradicts tefillin or totafot, you know, if someone's talking about tefillin and they're saying, okay, well, these things about, okay, well, this isn't foreign, but someone's saying some things that contradict it, then that's something that's foreign. So this is Ehav Ever from the Chronicles of Ehav Ever. And, basically, I hope everyone's doing well and enjoy.